Hey YouTube, Kira Qualia here, bringing you all my future card Buddyfight Shadow Dragon deck profile for post-Buddy Ragnarok. With the release of the latest Buddy Ragnarok set, we were given the new powerhouse to the Shadow Dragon deck, being Shadow Dragon Revival Buddy, an awesome card that just builds up for the power that this deck can do. And with the support we've gotten throughout the years with the sets including Buddy Lineage, the deck just became a true synergy sold building deck to power up all of your different Shadow Dragons you have on the field. So I wanted to bring you all a deck profile. It is a deck we've been working in my group of friends to put together, just for the sole fact that Shadow Dragon is a very special card that says you may have any number of Shadow Dragons in your deck. So having more of this card definitely helps to build up the playstyle that you can do for the deck. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. Now, one thing to remember with the Shadow Dragon deck is there is the the type of card being Shadow Dragon and the actual Shadow Dragon monster. If there is a parentheses on the card, it states that you can use any of the Shadow Dragon cards, but if it has quotations, it means you have to use the Shadow Dragon monster, specifically the one I just showed you here. But for the monsters, for our go-to number, since you can run any number of Shadow Dragon, I'm running 10 of the original Shadow Dragon. Now, what's consistent with this and the Revival Buddy is you have to have your Revival Buddy is best set up when it's put into the soul of your Shadow Dragon monsters. So having this one as the option to use from the field, with this card, like I said before, you can have any number of Shadow Dragon in your deck and call for friends. Pay 1 gauge. If you do, put the top 2 cards of your deck into your drop zone. Call any number of Shadow Dragon from among them by paying their call cost, and you may use this ability once per turn. So with this, you can call Shadow Dragon monsters. They have the parentheses. So any of the different size Shadow Dragon monsters you reveal with this ability can be called out onto the field. So remember that. And also, there's no specific name for the ability for Shadow Dragons. So using this skill for the call for friends is just a big help to set up the name for your setup of all your different Shadow Dragons on the field. So very, very useful there when you set up the drop zone with more and more copies of Shadow Dragons. But we have plenty of other spells in the deck as well to help with that setup, because getting them into the drop zone is the best way to go about using their abilities. For the newest version of Shadow Dragon, being Shadow Dragon Revival Buddy, we are running 9 copies of this card. I wanted to go between 18 to 20 copies of all Shadow Dragons in total. The more you have, the more consistent it is that they'll wind up in your drop zone, that you can call some. The call cost for this card isn't any call cost. You can just call this card out to the field. So if you reveal any of them with the original Shadow Dragon, you can call them out to the field to use, but their true power comes when they're in the soul of a Shadow Dragon. All Shadow Dragon on your field get power plus 5,000 and defense plus 5,000, and the abilities of all cards in your soul cannot be nullified by your opponent's card effects. So being able to have any number of Shadow Dragon Revival Buddy in the deck as well is the big plus for sure. But the more and more of this card you have in the soul of your different Shadow Dragon monsters on the field, the more powerful all of your different Shadow Dragons will become, which I'll show you the ideal field you can have for all the different numbers of Shadow Dragons you can build up also at the end of the video. So I'm running 10 copies of the original Shadow Dragon and 9 copies of the Revival Buddy. Just having more and more of this setup makes it all the better for sure. For some of the other different size Shadow Dragon monsters, I run 3 Die Shadow Dragon. With this, you cover the call cost. You put a Shadow Dragon from your field and 2 Shadow Dragon from your drop zone into its soul and pay 3 gauge. So that's a big thing to remember with this deck. You do need a lot of gauge, but there's plenty of spells we can use to build up that for our setup. And all Shadow Dragon on your field get plus 1,000 for each Shadow Dragon in this card's soul. So not only does it build up the power of your Shadow Dragons, but being able to stack these numbers with Shadow Dragon Revival Buddy make it all the better as well. Being a call cost, the 3 gauge is definitely, pretty hefty to pay. But once you do, you have these set up for more and more of your other Shadow Dragons to build up strength-wise. With the next number that we're running for Shadow Dragons being Dread Shadow Dragon, its call cost is put a Shadow Dragon from your field and 5 Shadow Dragon from your drop zone in your this card's soul and pay 3 gauge. So remember, you can't call it on top of Die Shadow Dragon. It has the quotations for the specifically named Shadow Dragon monster, but you can still have excellent setup depending on either one of these you call out. This one just has a bigger call cost because you need to put 5 Shadow Dragons from your drop zone into its soul. Same gauge cost, but having a 2,000 power buildup for each Shadow Dragon in your soul and the stacking power of your own Shadow Dragon Revival Buddies makes it a true powerhouse and the one you want to rely on for the play I will show at the end of the video video. But our main go-to boss monster in the deck is Limitless Dragon, Emperor, Shadow Dragon. Your size 3 monster. You put this card on top of a Shadow Dragon monster on your field and put 3 Shadow Dragon from your drop zone into its soul and pay 3 gauge. So if you have your Dread Shadow Dragon set up on the field, this one specifies Shadow Dragon with parentheses. So you're able to just place this card on top of an already set up Dread Shadow Dragon on your field. So as long as you have that set up ready to go, you'll be able to have a soul filled to the max with different Shadow Dragons, whether you use the original or the Revival Buddy, because the Revival Buddy also counts as the original Shadow Dragon, so remember that. Running for this, just so you see this card more available as well. You can also call it off of Call for Friends as long as you have the gauge to use. So make sure your gauge is set up when you use your Call for Friends, and then you'll either be calling it from the drop zone when you set it up or from your hand to call it out. And the fact that at the start of each player's attack phase, you may put 2 Shadow Dragon from your drop zone into the soul. If you do, all Shadow Dragon on your field get plus 5,000 defense, power, and critical +1, penetrate, and double attack. And that's including all the small Shadow Dragons, which you'll want set up on the field as well. Because this is a size 3, having the original Shadow Dragons on the field will boost up all their powers thanks to the Revival Buddy. And then you'll be able to have double attack with each of these cards, and these cards alone will be able to hit a good number of different monsters on your opponent's field. And that is it for the monsters. We'll now move on to the item. The item of choice for the deck is Shadow Scale Sword, Drago Shadow. This card can attack even if you have a Shadow Dragon monster on your center, and souls of all Shadow Dragon monsters on your field cannot be put into the drop zone by your opponent's card effects. And this card can also gain from the boosted power-up and, offense of your Emperor Shadow Dragon. But what's really great about Drago Shadow is when a Shadow Dragon monster enters your field from your hand, put the top card of your deck into your gauge. So with this, you'll have, it's not a once per turn setup either. So the more Shadow Dragons you call from your hand, the more gauge you'll build up as well. So calling these smaller Shadow Dragons from your hand builds up the gauge you need for your plays. And like I said, it's not a once per turn. As long as you keep calling them out from the hand, you'll keep having the gauge to use for your other resources. And as for the spells in the deck, there is one called Shadow Dragon Gauge, which I don't have in the deck. It's one I'm still ordering, but I still wanted to do the deck profile to show you all my build. It is a card that lets you put 5 Shadow Dragons from your deck into your drop zone. If you do, you put top 3 cards of your deck into your gauge. It's great setup for the playstyle of the deck, thinning out some of the other smaller Shadow Dragons like the Revival Buddies, placing them into the drop zone, and giving you the gauge you need for your call cost. I don't have the card yet. I'm still waiting for it to come in, but until then, I am proxying in 4 blue dragon shields for that card. Like I said, just another gauge building defense shield, but you usually have a card in your center, so this rarely pops up. I may use it early game at times, but like I said, it's just in there for the option to defend, but I would prefer this card to be Shadow Dragon Gauge when I get it. And for one of the newer cards from the Buddy Lineage set, I run 4 Dragonic Shadow Shuffle. You choose up to 3 Shadow Dragon from your deck, put 1 from among them into your gauge, 1 into your hand, and drop the rest, then shuffle your deck. You may only cast Dragonic Shadow Shuffle once per turn. It has the parentheses for Shadow Dragon as well, so you're able to add any of the different size Shadow Dragon, which I normally go for Limitless Dragon, Emperor, Shadow Dragon, and then set up my gauge and drop zone with the Revival Buddies. But you definitely want 4 of it. It is a once per turn, but I definitely like to see this card along with Dragonic Shadow Gauge to have the setup and just all the different, 5 different Shadow Dragons I need for the setup of my big boss monster on the field. For more of the defensive spells, I do still like to run a few of them in the deck to have the option to stop my opponent's monsters from attacking, especially when I go up against cards like Lost World, or even, a big one I've been wanting to test out against is Zerberos. So I run the 4 Drago Trap. You have the life to pay for this deck, aside from the fear of lifelink, which remember that as well. With Drago Trap, you pay 1 gauge and pay 2 life. Choose a card in your opponent's field, and for this turn, that card cannot attack. So it's not like the card is rested and your opponent could just restand it. The card isn't allowed to attack. That's why I like to run 4 of this card, so you always have the defensive option against your opponent, and, protect your Shadow Dragons if you have some of the weaker ones you want to keep on the field to call out some of the stronger ones next turn. For some of the lower numbers of cards, I also run 2 Dragonic Charge Plus. Put the top 2 cards of your deck into your gauge. Then if you have 5 life or less, put the top 3 cards of your deck into your gauge. You only cast Dragonic Charge Plus once per turn. More gauge buildup. It gives you 5 gauge, which you'll definitely need plenty of to summon out all your different sized Shadow Dragons onto the field to use. And for early game damage as well, I run 2 Dragonic Endure. I've been debating if I want to take out the Dragonic Charge Pluses and then just put in the 3 Endures. It is a counter spell, so you can easily use it when you are just cast damage. So even if your opponent attacks you first, you can activate this and then have the gauge set up when your first turn comes around already and ready to go, just with the little amount of damage you might have taken against your opponent. And lastly, I run one of the Impact Shadow Dragon arts, Dividing Shadow. With all the soul you can build up, you put any number of soul from a Shadow Dragon on the field into the drop zone and counter. Choose cards in your opponent's field up to the number of cards put in the drop zone by this card. Its cast cost, and destroy those chosen cards. You gain life and deal damage to your opponent equal to the number of cards destroyed. So the more cards your opponent has set up on the field, the more damage you'll do with your Dividing Shadows. And you should have plenty of soul to build up. And usually I like to drop the souls of the original Shadow Dragons. The Revival Buddies are too precious to, waste for the defensive and offensive power they provide. So being able to send normal Shadow Dragons is what I normally like to do, and then hit usually for the amount of damage I need to win the game against my opponent as well. As for the go-to play in the deck, if you have the gauge setup, which normally you need at least 6 for the playstyle, you can easily do so if you have your weapon equipped and you called plenty of other numbers of Shadow Dragons onto the field. So we'll go ahead and zoom for a little more room for the playstyle setup. And so basically you'll have the 6 gauge setup and also your Shadow Dragon with, if you have your Drago Saber, it can be one of the potential ways you built up the gauge on the field, but also just being able to have the different spell cards we ran can be both options of how you picked up the gauge in your usage. Even, Shadow Dragon Gauge, like I said, is a very, very good card for the setup. Having all of your different Shadow Dragons set up in the drop zone as well with that card would be the ideal way to set it up, because you do need these numbers in the drop zone as well. So what you'll do is you will first have your size 1 Dread Shadow Dragon, which if you call with Call for Friends off of this card and call any additional Shadow Dragons to the field, it makes it all the better, because not only will you have the setup for your play to go for, you'll want to use them for that play. So with the first one being that you pay 3 gauge with your Dread Shadow Dragon, and then call this card on top, as well as putting 5 Shadow Dragons, which will have to have them in the drop zone first before you pay the gauge for that setup. And then you'll have your Dread Shadow Dragon on the field with all the soul ready to go also. And then your boss monster will be your Limitless Shadow Dragon, which then you'll pay the gauge for this as well, putting the additional numbers in your soul to use. And then during each battle phase, if you have the setup for your Shadow Dragons in the drop zone, excuse me, you'll be able to place these cards in, giving each additional Shadow Dragon on the field the Penetrate, double attack, and also plus 5,000 power, defense, and critical, including your weapon you have equipped. And with all the Revival Buddies in the soul, that's plenty of soul to defend against your opponent, and just the power stacking makes it so it'll almost be impossible for your opponent to hit any of your other cards you have on the field, having all that power. And each turn, at the start of an attack phase, you put 2 more Shadow Dragons from your drop zone into this card's soul, making it, if they can't recover at least more than 2 each battle phase, it's that much more difficult to destroy. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoy the video. It's a very fun deck. I'm glad I was finally able to finish it. I can't wait to test out more of it. But until next time, I hope you all enjoyed. And once again, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. And Kira Qualia out.